The rain came down in cold silver sheets the afternoon Adeline Merrick stood in front of the rotting Victorian house at 42 Thornwood Lane. Her coat was soaked through. Her suitcase sat in a puddle by her feet. And in her right hand, she gripped a tarnished brass key that felt heavier than it should have. 22 years the house had stood empty. 22 years the paint had peeled from its siding. 22 years the ivy had swallowed its chimney. The neighbors crossed the street to avoid its shadow. They said a clockmaker had vanished inside those walls one winter night, and the house had been waiting for someone ever since. Adeline was 23 years old. 3 weeks ago she had a father, a home in Portland, a future that made sense. Now she had $15,000 from an inheritance that should have been $5 million. She had a stepmother who had smiled at the funeral. She had 2 stepbrothers who had changed the locks before her father's body was cold in the ground. And she had this house. Across the street, an old woman lifted her hand in a slow, patient wave, as if she had been waiting a long, long time. Adeline turned the key. The door opened, but that key was not the beginning of her story. It was the middle. The beginning had happened 3 weeks earlier. In a mahogany office, in downtown Portland, on the worst day of her life. The workshop smelled like brass and old oil. It always had, ever since she was 6 years old, and small enough to sit on her father's workbench, kicking her legs against the drawer handles, while he taught her the names of tools. Escapement wheel, balance staff, mainspring. Nathaniel Merrick had hands like a surgeon, steady, precise. He could take apart a 100-year-old pocket watch and put it back together while the second hand kept ticking. And he had taught his daughter to do the same. Not his stepsons. Not the 2 boys who came with Cordelia. Just Adeline. Watch the wheel, he'd say. The wheel tells the truth. People lie. Numbers lie. But a wheel spinning at the wrong speed? That's your father telling you something is wrong. She was 7 when he said that. She didn't understand it. She would. Nathaniel Merrick built his company from nothing. Merrick Holdings, a small residential construction firm in Portland, Maine that grew, over 30 years, into something worth $5 million. Not billionaire money, not headline money, but enough to give his daughter a good life. Enough to promise her the workshop would be hers one day. Enough for someone to want to take it. Adeline's mother died when she was 3. Ellen Merrick, a quiet woman with soft hands, who used to sing while she made bread. Adeline barely remembered her face, only her voice, only the humming. For 20 years it was just her and her father. Then Cordelia arrived. She came with 2 grown sons. Sebastian Ashcroft, 30 years old, sharp jaw, sharper smile, the kind of man who introduced himself with a handshake that lasted a beat too long. And Julian Ashcroft, 27, softer, quieter, always half a step behind his brother, like he was still trying to figure out where to stand. Cordelia was 52, blonde, polished. She wore her wealth like perfume. She laughed at Nathaniel's jokes with her whole body. She touched his arm when she spoke. Adeline watched her the way she watched a clock running fast. Something's off. Something's off. Something's off. But her father was smiling again, for the first time in almost 20 years. And Adeline was 20 years old, and lonely and tired of being the only one who could make her father laugh. So she said nothing. She smiled at the wedding. She smiled when Cordelia moved into the house. She smiled when Sebastian started sitting in her father's chair at the head of the dining table, like he'd always belonged there. She smiled, and she watched. 3 years passed. Adeline was 23. She still worked at the company. She still spent every Saturday in the workshop with her father. She still, on quiet nights, felt the small cold thing in her chest that whispered, "Something is wrong." She just couldn't prove it. Sebastian was too smooth. Cordelia was too kind. Julian was too eager to please. And her father was happy, until he wasn't. The last week of his life, Nathaniel Merrick got quiet. Not sad. Not sick, just quiet. He stopped watching the evening news. He started spending long hours in the workshop with the door closed. He asked Adeline strange questions. Do you remember Camden? Camden, Maine? Your mother loved it there. The lighthouses, the little harbor. Dad, are you okay? He looked at her for a long time, longer than a normal look, the kind of look people give when they're memorizing a face. Adeline, listen to me. If anything ever happens to me, anything at all, don't trust the paperwork. Trust the ticking. The ticking of what? He smiled, a small, tired smile. You'll know. 3 days later, he was dead. Heart attack. That's what they said. Massive coronary event. Sudden. Painless. In his sleep. The paramedics were kind. The funeral director was kind. Cordelia was kind. Sebastian was kind. Everyone was so kind. Adeline sat through the funeral in a black dress that didn't fit right. She stared at the casket. She listened to the priest talk about a man he had never met. She held Cordelia's hand and felt nothing. And then, in the third row, she saw Sebastian. He was smiling. Not a full smile. Not a smile anyone else would notice. Just the very corner of his mouth. Turned up, for maybe 2 seconds, when he thought no one was looking. Then his face went back to grief. Adeline felt something cold slide down her spine and settle in her stomach like a stone. He's happy. My father is dead and he's happy. She didn't say anything. Not yet. The reading of the will was a week later. The lawyer's office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown. Mahogany paneling. Green banker's lamps. A grandfather clock in the corner ticking too slowly. Adeline sat in a leather chair that was too big for her. Cordelia sat across the desk in a black Chanel suit, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. Sebastian lounged beside her, checking his watch. A Rolex. New. Julian sat by the window. He wouldn't look at Adeline. The lawyer was a stranger. A man named Harold Prescott. Not her father's usual attorney. Someone new. Adeline's stomach tightened. Trust the ticking. The lawyer cleared his throat and opened the folder. To my daughter, Adeline Merrick, I leave the sum of $15,000. The room stopped. Adeline waited for the next sentence. The one that said, and also. The one that said, in addition. The one that said, and the company, and the house, and everything else her father had promised her, since she was old enough to hold a wrench. It didn't come. The remainder of my estate, including all liquid assets, property holdings, and the entirety of Merrick Holdings, I leave to my beloved wife, Cordelia Ashcroft Merrick. Silence. The grandfather clock ticked. Adeline heard her own voice, somewhere far away. That's a mistake. The lawyer didn't look up. There's no mistake, Miss Merrick. That's a mistake. Adeline. Cordelia's voice. Sweet. Sad. Poisonous. Adeline, darling. He changed it. 3 weeks ago. He told me. He said you weren't ready. Adeline turned to look at her. He told you. He said you were fragile. He said the pressure would break you. He said that. He loved you, Adeline. He wanted you to find your own way, without leaning on him. Sebastian looked up from his watch. Speaking of which, we're staging the house for a magazine feature tomorrow. So if you could be out by tonight, that would be great. Thanks. Adeline stared at him. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't throw anything. She stood up. She walked out. And she left every single thing she owned inside that house except her purse. She sat in her car in the parking garage for 45 minutes before she could turn the key. Her hands were shaking too hard. Not from grief. Not yet. From the second thing. The other thing. The thing that had settled in her stomach when Sebastian smiled at the funeral. Something is wrong. Something is very, very wrong. She drove to a motel off Route 1. A place called the Sea Breeze Inn that had not seen a sea breeze in decades. The desk clerk gave her a room key and didn't ask questions. She paid in cash from the $15,000. The room smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke. The bedspread was orange. The TV had a crack down the middle of the screen. Adeline sat on the edge of the bed, with her purse still in her lap. She cried for exactly 4 minutes. Then she stopped, because crying wasn't going to fix this. For 3 days she sat in that room and thought. She thought about her father's face in that last week. Quiet, watchful, memorizing her. She thought about Sebastian smiling at the funeral. She thought about Cordelia's dry eyes and her silk handkerchief. She thought about the way Julian wouldn't look at her at the will reading. And she thought about her father's voice. Don't trust the paperwork. Trust the ticking. On the 3rd day, she pulled out the coat she'd worn to the funeral. Her father's coat. An old brown wool coat he'd given her the winter before, when hers had gotten too thin. She'd worn it to the service because it smelled like him, like brass and oil and pipe tobacco. She reached into the inside pocket for a tissue. Her fingers touched paper. Not a tissue. Something stiffer. She pulled it out. It was a postcard. Old. The edges were soft with handling. The photo on the front was a small New England harbor. Fishing boats. A white lighthouse. A wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Camden, Maine." She flipped it over. Her father's handwriting. In blue ink. Just 3 lines. "My darling girl. Trust the ticking. 42 Thornwood Lane." Adeline stared at the postcard until the room went dark. She left the motel at dawn. She didn't call Cordelia. She didn't call Sebastian. She didn't call anyone. She drove north. Portland to Camden was 2.5 hours up the coast. Route 1 most of the way. Past small towns with names like Wiscasset and Rockport. Past lobster shacks closed for the season. Past the ocean stretching gray and endless to her right. She thought about a lot of things on that drive. She thought about the $15,000 in her checking account. About how first and last month's rent on a decent apartment in Portland would eat half of it. About how she couldn't go home. About how she didn't have a home. She thought about her father saying trust the ticking. She thought about Camden. She had never been there. She didn't know why he'd sent her. She was going anyway. Camden was smaller than she'd expected. A working harbor. White clapboard houses. A main street with a bookshop and a diner and a hardware store. October light on the water. The kind of place people put on postcards. She found a bed and breakfast on Chestnut Street run by a woman who didn't ask questions. She paid for 2 nights. She left her suitcase in the room. Then she walked to the town hall. She was looking for the property records office. She didn't know what she was looking for. She figured she'd know when she found it. She found it in a bulletin board by the door. Knox County Tax Lien Auction. 42 Thornwood Lane, Camden. Late Victorian. Abandoned 22 years. Sold as is. Sight unseen. Starting bid. $8,000. Auction Tuesday, 10 a.m. Adeline read the address 3 times. 42 Thornwood Lane. Her father's postcard. The number matched. She sat down on the wooden bench in the hallway and stared at the flyer. Her hands were shaking again. Trust the ticking. Her father had known. He had known she would come here. He had known she would find this. He had known. But why? She didn't have an answer. She just knew she was going to that auction. The auction was on Tuesday morning. It was held in the basement of the town hall. Fluorescent lights, folding chairs, coffee that smelled like it had been made in 1987. Maybe 15 people in the room, most of them men with clipboards, flippers, investors, the kind of men who bought old houses for parts. Adeline sat in the back row in her father's brown coat. She was the youngest person there by 20 years. The auctioneer worked through 6 properties before he got to hers. Lot 7. 42 Thornwood Lane. Victorian construction, late 1800s. Abandoned 22 years. Extensive cosmetic damage. Possible structural issues. Sold as is, sight unseen. Starting bid, $8,000. The room got quiet. Really quiet. One of the flippers made a noise in his throat That sounded like a laugh. That's the clockmaker's house, someone muttered. The one with the ghost? The one with the stories, more like. A few people chuckled. Nervously, the auctioneer cleared his throat. 8,000. Do I hear 8? Silence. 7,500? Silence. Adeline raised her paddle. Every head in the room turned. The auctioneer squinted at her. Bidder 11. 7,500. Do I hear 8? Silence. Do I hear 8? The flipper in the third row shook his head slowly, like he was watching a car wreck. Going once. Going twice. Sold. To the young lady in the back. For $7,500. The gavel came down. Adeline felt every eye in the room on her. She didn't care. She had a house. With taxes and fees, the total came to $10,500. She wrote a check with her father's $15,000 and had $4,500 left to her name. The county clerk was a tired woman, with reading glasses on a chain. She slid a manila envelope across the counter. Deed, insurance disclosure, property history, key. The key was inside a small paper envelope. Brass, heavy, tarnished almost black. Adeline picked it up. It was cold. The clerk was watching her. You know the story of that place, honey? No. The clerk looked at her a long moment. The man who built it, Silas Hartwick. He was a clockmaker, custom work for wealthy families up and down the coast. Then one winter 22 years ago he just disappeared. Disappeared how? Walked out into a snowstorm one night. Never came home. No body. No note. No nothing. The house just sat there. Bank couldn't sell it. County couldn't tear it down. Something to do with the deed being in a trust nobody could find the paperwork for. Adeline's stomach tightened. A trust. Yeah, some kind of family thing, I guess. Nobody ever came forward to claim it. Adeline held the brass key in her palm. Do you know, she said carefully, if a man named Nathaniel Merrick ever asked about this house? The clerk looked up sharply. Merrick, from Portland? The builder? Yes. The clerk was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he came in 6 months ago, asked to see the tax records, sat right there for 2 hours reading through them. Adeline gripped the counter. What did he want? The clerk shook her head. Wouldn't say, but when he left, he asked me one question. He asked me when the property was going to auction. And you told him? I told him, October 15th. Adeline looked at the calendar on the clerk's desk. Today's date was October 15th. She drove to Thornwood Lane in the rain. It was the last house on a dead-end street. The rest of the street was pretty. Well-kept Cape Cods, fenced gardens, a yellow lab watching her from a front porch, wind chimes, pumpkins on the steps for the season. And then, at the end, number 42. It sat behind an overgrown hedge like something the street was trying to hide. The paint was gone. The porch was sagging. The windows were boarded up. The ivy had climbed to the second floor and was working on the third. The whole house leaned slightly to the left, as if it were tired. Adeline killed the engine. She sat in the car for a long time. She could turn around. She could sell the deed back to the county. She could take her $4,500 and start over somewhere warm. Instead, she got out of the car. She walked up the wooden steps. They groaned under her weight. She slid the brass key into the lock. She had to put her whole shoulder against the door to turn it. There was a sharp crack. Like a bone breaking, the door swung open. The smell hit her first. Damp wood, old paper, something metallic underneath, something she couldn't quite name. She stepped inside. The foyer was enormous, ceilings 12 feet high. A grand staircase curved up into darkness. The banister was carved, with vines and small strange faces. Some of them looked like they were laughing. Some of them looked like they were screaming. Adeline clicked on her flashlight. Sheets covered every piece of furniture. They looked like ghosts standing in rows. In the parlor to the left, Something enormous was covered under a stained canvas. She lifted the edge. A grand piano. The ivory keys were yellowed. The wood was warped. But she could see the brand plate. Steinway. Someone had loved this house once. She walked deeper in. She found a kitchen with copper pots still hanging on the rack. A study with leather-bound books on the shelves, their spines cracked with age. A dining room with a table for 12, set with dust-covered china that had never been cleared. Everywhere she went, she felt it. The strange feeling, the prickle at the back of her neck. Someone lived here, and then one day they didn't. She was standing in the study, running her fingers along the spines of the books, when she heard a voice behind her. "Well, you're braver than I was." Adeline spun around, her flashlight beam catching a face. An old woman, standing in the doorway, holding a covered plate. She had white hair pinned up in a soft knot. A green wool cardigan. Kind, tired eyes. "I didn't mean to startle you," the woman said. The front door was open. "Who are you?" "Rosalind Ainsworth. I live across the street. Number 39, the yellow house." Adeline's flashlight was still pointed at her chest. She lowered it slowly. "I'm Adeline Merrick," the old woman said gently. "I know." The blood left Adeline's face. "How do you know my name?" Rosalind smiled. It was a soft, sad smile. The kind of smile people give when they are about to tell you something that will change your life. "Because, sweetheart, you look exactly like your mother." Adeline couldn't speak. Rosalind held out the covered plate. "I brought you an apple pie, still warm, and a thermos of tea. I thought you might need something to eat before you started." "Started what?" Rosalind looked past her, into the darkness of the house. "Started listening, dear." She turned to go. At the doorway she paused. "There are things in this house, Adeline. Things your father wanted you to find. But they won't come easily, and they won't come all at once. You'll need time, and you'll need a friend." She met Adeline's eyes. "I've been waiting a long time to be that friend. My door is always open. The kettle's always on. Come find me when you're ready." Then she was gone. Adeline stood in the foyer with the pie in her hands. Her father had known this woman, or her mother had, or both. She sat down on the bottom step of the grand staircase. She unwrapped the pie. She ate a slice with her hands because she didn't have a fork. It was the best thing she had eaten in 3 weeks. She cried while she ate it. She didn't know why. That night, she made a bed for herself in the study. She unrolled the cheap camping mat she'd bought at the hardware store. She wrapped herself in her father's brown coat. She locked every door she could find. She wedged a chair under the study door handle. She put her flashlight, and her phone, and her father's postcard on the floor beside her. She lay on her back in the dark. The house creaked. Old houses creak. That was normal. She told herself that. Old houses creak. She almost fell asleep. And then, at exactly 2:17 in the morning, she heard it. Tick. She opened her eyes. Tick. Slow. Steady. Coming from above her. From the ceiling. Tick. Not a clock in the room. Not the pipes. Not the wind. Tick. Something enormous. Something patient. Something that had been ticking for 22 years, and had no intention of stopping. Adeline sat up in the dark. She listened. Tick. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her father's postcard. She held it against her chest. Trust the ticking. Somewhere above her, in a sealed part of the house she had not yet found, a machine that no one had wound in 22 years was still keeping time. And it was keeping it for her. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she called every contractor in Camden, until one answered. His name was Declan Fairholt. He said he could be there by 9. She sat on the front porch and waited, wrapped in her father's coat, drinking cold tea from Rosalind's thermos, watching the mist rise off the harbor down the hill. A pickup truck rolled up at 8:45. The man who got out was tall, late 30s, dark hair going gray at the temples. Work boots, tool belt slung over one shoulder. The kind of face that had been outside a lot. He climbed the porch steps and looked her up and down. "You bought the Hartwick place." "I did." He whistled. "Lo, lady, you are either the bravest person I ever met, or the craziest. Both, probably. I need you to check the second floor." "Why?" Adeline stood up. She looked him in the eye. "Because there's something ticking up there. And I need to know what it is." Declan Fairholt stared at her for a long moment. Then he shifted his tool belt. "All right then," he said. "Let's go find it." They went inside. Together, they climbed the grand staircase, into the dark. And somewhere above their heads, somewhere behind a wall no one had opened in 22 years, the ticking got louder. The second floor was colder than the first. Not by a little, by a lot. Adeline felt it the moment her boot touched the top step. Like walking into a refrigerator. Like the house had a heartbeat, and this was closer to it. Declan felt it too. She could tell. His shoulders tightened. His flashlight beam moved slower. He was a man who worked in old houses for a living. And this one was making the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The hallway stretched in front of them, 12 feet wide. Wallpaper peeling in strips. 6 doors on either side. All closed. "Which room?" Declan said. "I don't know. You said you heard ticking." "I did." "From where?" "Everywhere. Above me. All night." Declan turned in a slow circle. He aimed his flashlight at the ceiling. He tapped the plaster with the butt of his flashlight. "How high is this ceiling?" "I don't know. 9 feet. Maybe 9.5. "Okay. Adeline." He turned to look at her. "I was looking at the roofline from outside. This house has to be 3 stories tall." She stared at him. "There's no third-floor door up here." "There has to be." "There isn't." "Then where does the third floor go?" Declan didn't answer. He was already walking. They spent 2 hours checking every room. Master bedroom, guest bedroom, nursery, sewing room, bathroom with a clawfoot tub full of dead spiders, library with books swollen fat from decades of damp air. Every ceiling was 9 feet. Every ceiling was solid plaster. Every ceiling had no hatch, no pull-down stairs, no trapdoor, no seam. Declan measured with a laser tool. He wrote numbers in a small notebook. He frowned. He measured again. "This doesn't add up." "How?" "There's 12 feet of house up there, between this ceiling and the roof. 12 feet of space we cannot get into. 12 feet. Enough for a floor. Enough for a whole floor, Adeline. And I can't find the door." He walked to the end of the eastern hallway. He stopped. He tapped his flashlight against the wall. "Come here." Adeline came. He tapped again. Solid on the left. Solid on the right. Solid above. Solid below. Except in one spot. He tapped it again. The sound came back different. Hollow. Not much, but different. He tapped the spot next to it. Solid. Back to the hollow spot. Not solid. Declan looked at Adeline. "There's a room behind this wall. There's a wall behind this wall." "No. A room. A sealed room." He ran his palm along the wallpaper. His fingers stopped. He pressed. The wall didn't move. But something inside the wall did. A small metallic click. Almost too quiet to hear. Adeline felt the sound in her teeth. "Declan. I heard it." "What was that?" "I don't know." He stepped back. He looked at the wall. He looked at the wall to the left of it. He looked at the wall to the right of it. Then he pulled a small level from his tool belt. He held it against the wall. The bubble sat off center. "This wall's thicker than the rest." "How much thicker?" "Twice as thick. Maybe 3 times. Adeline touched the wallpaper. It was old. Yellowing. A pattern of small blue flowers. It looked exactly like every other wall on this floor. Except it wasn't. Because on the other side of it was 22 years of silence. And something ticking. She called Rosalind. She didn't know why. She just did. Rosalind picked up on the second ring. Adeline, there's a wall. On the third floor. Adeline stopped breathing for a second. How did you know? The line was quiet. Then Rosalind said, very softly, because your father spent 3 weeks up there last April. And when he left, that wall looked exactly like the others. He was very good with his hands. Adeline sat down on the top step of the grand staircase. She sat down because her legs stopped working. My father built the wall. Your father hid something behind the wall, sweetheart. In a workshop that has been up there for nearly a century. He didn't build the room. He just closed the door. What? The workshop belonged to Silas. It was there long before your father was born. Silas taught your father his trade 40 years ago. Your father knew every inch of that house, dear. He knew what was up there. He just needed to make sure nobody else did. Adeline closed her eyes. Rosalind, break the wall? Yes. Now? Right now. The line went dead. Declan looked at her. Well, break it. Adeline. Once I break this, there's no putting it back. I don't want to put it back. You're sure? Declan. She looked at him. Her father's daughter. Her father's eyes. He built that wall for me, and I want in. Declan nodded. Once. He set down his coffee. He picked up his sledgehammer. He rolled his shoulders. He swung. The first hit shook the whole hallway. Plaster dust exploded into the air. A picture frame fell off the wall behind them and shattered. The second hit went deeper. The third hit went through. Declan pulled back. There was a hole the size of a dinner plate in the wall. Dust was still falling. And behind the hole was darkness. Real darkness. The kind of darkness that has been dark for a very, very long time. He shone his flashlight in. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Adeline, come look at this. She came. She looked. She stopped breathing. Behind the hole was a small landing. And on the landing was a set of narrow wooden stairs. Ascending. Into darkness. Into the ticking. It took Declan another 20 minutes to open the hole wide enough to walk through. He worked carefully. Not because he was tired. Because he was scared. Adeline stood behind him with her flashlight. She didn't say a word. When it was done, they stood side by side and looked at the opening. A cold breath of air came out. It smelled like lavender. That was the strangest part. Lavender, and brass, and oil, and something older than either of them. Declan turned to her. Ladies first. No. He almost smiled. Together, then. The stairs were steep. 15 steps up. Wooden treads. Each one creaking under their weight like it was trying to warn them. Adeline held the railing with one hand. Her father's postcard was in her other pocket. She could feel the corner of it against her hip. Trust the ticking. The ticking got louder as they climbed. Louder and louder. Not a wristwatch ticking. Not a wall clock ticking. Something big. Something with weight. Something with authority. They reached the top step. Declan stopped. He aimed his flashlight forward. The beam swept across the room. Adeline made a sound. She didn't know what the sound was. It wasn't a word. It was just a sound. Because it wasn't an attic. It wasn't a storage room. It was... Sunlight was coming through the ceiling. Sunlight. In a sealed room. At the top of a house that had no third-floor windows. There was a skylight. An enormous glass skylight. Set into the roof. Cleaned. Recent. Someone had been up there in the last year cleaning it. The room was enormous. Longer than the whole second floor. High ceilings. Reinforced beams. And hanging from those beams. Gears. Hundreds of them. Brass. Copper. Steel. Every size. From the size of a coin to the size of a dinner plate. Connected by tightly wound cables. Turning. Slowly. All of them turning. Together. Making the ticking. Tick. 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 In the center of the room, dominating everything. A brass cylinder. 12 feet tall. 6 feet across. Built like the innards of a grandfather clock. Big enough to walk inside. Beside it, on a wooden track set into the floor. An iron block on a chain, slowly dragging forward, dropping, scraping back, dragging forward again, scrape, thud, scrape, thud. The sound Adeline had heard her first night. Not a ghost, a counterweight. The house wasn't haunted. The house was a machine. Declan stepped forward, slowly, like he was walking into a church. I have never, he said, in my life, seen anything like this. Adeline couldn't speak. She walked to the nearest workbench. It was covered in tools, brass calipers, tiny screwdrivers laid out in perfect rows, a magnifying lens on a stand, a leather-bound ledger with a strap around it. She lifted the ledger. She untied the strap. She opened the cover. The first page was written in careful copperplate handwriting. Silas Hartwick, Master Horologist, Private Commissions, Confidential. Adeline turned the page. Client names, dates, notes, Van Buren Estate, Concealed Compartment, Library Floor, 1987. Wentworth Family, Wall Safe, Bedroom, Combination linked to birth date, 1991. Halloran Trust, Vault Chamber, Basement, Pendulum Lock, 1994. Page after page. Old money, Boston money, Newport money. Families who wanted things kept quiet. Families who trusted a clockmaker to keep them. Silas Hartwick had not been a clockmaker. Silas Hartwick had been a hider of things. A hider of things for people who had things worth hiding. She turned to the last page with writing on it. Not dated in Silas's hand. Dated 8 months ago. In her father's hand. Nathaniel Merrick. Portland, Maine. Working with Silas's original plans. Reactivating the pendulum vault. Multi-layer security. Physical timing mechanism. Client requests inheritor be capable of manual calculation. Client's note. My daughter will find this. Do not automate the lock. She was raised to solve it. Adeline sat down on the floor. She sat down because standing had stopped working. Declan crouched next to her. Adeline. He was here. When? 8 months ago. My father was here. In this room. Before he died. Declan looked at the ledger. He looked at the ticking gears. He looked at the brass cylinder in the middle of the room. He looked back at her. Adeline, your father knew he was dying. I know. He knew. And he built you a way through. I know. Her voice cracked. I know, Declan. I've known for 3 weeks. I just didn't have anywhere to put it. He sat down next to her on the floor. He didn't say anything. He just sat. 2 people. On the floor of a hidden workshop. In a house at the end of a dead-end street. In a small town in Maine. Being quiet together. For a long time. Rosalind came up the stairs an hour later. They heard her before they saw her. Slow footsteps. The tap of a wooden cane. She emerged into the light of the skylight. She looked at the gears. At the cylinder. At the workbench. And she began to cry. Quietly. Without drama. Just tears sliding down her cheeks. While she stood very still. Adeline stood up. You knew him. Rosalind nodded. Silas. He was my husband. The room got very quiet. Even the ticking seemed to hush. Adeline whispered. He disappeared. That is what the town says. What do you say? Rosalind wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. The way old women do. The way old women who have been holding grief for a long time do. I say he had been hiding valuables for very powerful people for 30 years. And I say one winter one of those people decided he had seen too much. He sent me away that November. He said, Rosalind, go to your sisters in Vermont. Stay for a month. Don't come back until I call. Her voice was steady, but paper thin. He never called. I never got the truth of what happened. I stopped waiting for him to come home. The house went into a trust. His trust. Couldn't touch it. The bank couldn't touch it. The state couldn't touch it. It just sat here, waiting. Waiting for what? Rosalind looked at her. For the next person who needed what he built. Adeline sat down on the workbench. She was trying to fit everything together in her head. And her head was not big enough. Rosalind sat down beside her. "Your father came to me last spring," she said. "He knocked on my door on a Tuesday afternoon. I hadn't seen him in 20 years. He said, 'Rosalind, I need to use the workshop again, and I need you to keep the secret.'" He knew the workshop. He'd known it for 40 years, dear. Silas was his mentor. When your father was starting out in construction, he did his apprentice work up in that room. Learning brass, learning tolerances, learning how to hide things inside walls without leaving a seam. Everything he became because of Silas. He never told me. He wouldn't have. He was quiet like that. But he came back last spring because he needed the one place in the world where he could work without anyone seeing him. And he needed the one person who would never tell. Rosalind reached into her cardigan pocket. She pulled out a small stack of letters, bound in a blue ribbon. And there was another reason he came back. "What?" "I knew your mother." Adeline turned to her. "You knew my mother. Ellen and I grew up together. On this very street. She lived at number 22, before her family moved to Portland, when she was 15. She wrote to me for years after she left, even after she married your father, even after you were born." She handed the letters to Adeline. Adeline took them with hands that were shaking. "She wrote about you constantly," Rosalind said. "About what you did at 3 months, 6 months, about the first time you laughed. About the day you took your first steps." Adeline pressed the letters against her chest. "I don't remember her. I know, dear. I was too little. I know. But she remembered me." "Adeline," Rosalind took her hand. "Before she died, Ellen made me promise something." "What?" she said. "Ros, if anything ever happens to me, and Adeline ever finds her way to Camden, please, please, please be there for her. Be the mother I couldn't be." Rosalind's eyes were wet. "I've been waiting 20 years to keep that promise, Adeline. I'm sorry it took this long." Adeline broke. She broke the way people break when they have been holding themselves together with tape and prayer for 3 weeks. She broke the way people break when they finally hear the thing they didn't know they needed to hear. She cried into Rosalind's cardigan. Rosalind held her. The gears kept ticking. The counterweight kept scraping. The house kept keeping time. For all of them, they worked on the vault for 2 days. It was in the center of the brass cylinder. There was no keyhole, no dial, no electronic pad, no handle, just a small hanging iron bucket suspended on a secondary chain. And beside it, mounted on the wall, a wooden board with an equation written in careful chalk. Adeline read it out loud. "The door yields only to the precise rhythm of time. The centrifugal governor will release the locking pin when the physical period of the pendulum achieves absolute resonance. Calculate the necessary mass. Below it, a formula. T equals 2 pi times the square root of I divided by mgl. Where T is the period, 2.1 seconds. Where I is the moment of inertia. Where m is the total mass. Where g is gravitational acceleration. And where L is the distance from the pivot to the center of mass." Declan whistled. "That's a physical pendulum equation." "I know. You know." Adeline picked up a piece of chalk. She turned it in her fingers. She smiled. For the first time in weeks. A small, sad, private smile. "My father taught me this equation," she said, "when I was 10. You're kidding. He drilled me on it for a whole summer." He said, "Adeline, if you understand this, you will always be able to open any door in life." She laughed, very softly. "I thought he was being poetic." She wrote on the board. Declan watched over her shoulder. She solved for M. She checked her work. She solved again. 14.6 kilograms, she said. "We need 14.6 kilograms in that bucket." Under one of the workbenches was a wooden crate, full of brass calibration weights, each one stamped with its mass. Silas Hartwick had thought of everything. Adeline lifted a 10-kilogram weight, then a 2, then a 2, then a smaller one. Point 6. She stood in front of the vault. She held the last weight in her palm. She looked at Rosalind. She looked at Declan. She lowered the weight into the bucket. Nothing happened for a full 10 seconds. Then, deep inside the brass cylinder, something shifted. Not a click, a groan, like a sleeping animal turning over. The ticking of the gears in the room changed. The tempo dropped. Deeper, slower, heartbeat slow. Clunk, 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 a hiss of released pressure. The steel door in the center of the brass cylinder. A door Adeline had not even realized was a door, until now because it had been welded flush, swung open, on hydraulic hinges, silent, perfect, 22 years since anyone had walked through it. And it opened like it had been oiled yesterday, because it had, by her father, 8 months ago. The three of them stared. None of them moved. Adeline stepped forward first, because she had to, because her father had built this for her. She walked into the vault. Inside, polished mahogany shelves, warm brass sconces that flickered on automatically as she entered, powered by some system she couldn't see. A small oak desk in the center of the room. On the desk, 3 things. A leather portfolio, a sealed manila envelope, and a thick cream-colored letter, addressed in her father's handwriting. To my daughter, Adeline, when you are ready. She opened the portfolio first. She had to sit down on the desk when she saw what was inside. Certificates, neatly organized, in plastic sleeves, treasury notes, blue chip stock certificates, gold bullion vault receipts, from a private storage facility in Providence, Rhode Island. A small ledger, in her father's hand, listing each holding and its value. She flipped through the ledger. The total at the bottom, in her father's careful block letters, $8.5 million, all held in the name of Thornwood Trust. Beneficiary, Adeline Merrick. She counted the numbers 3 times. $8.5 million. Legal. Traceable to the trust. Untouchable by Cordelia. Held for her. Only her. She sat down harder. Declan looked at Rosalind. Rosalind looked at Declan. Neither of them said a word. Adeline opened the manila envelope next. Inside, a USB drive, and a single sheet of paper. The paper said, everything Sebastian did, everything Cordelia forged, every wire transfer, every meeting, every offshore account, every threat, every lie. If you're reading this, they thought they had one. They were wrong. Adeline held the paper in her lap. She read it twice. Her father had known. Not just suspected. Not just worried. Known. For 8 months. He had known. And instead of confronting them, instead of fighting them in the open, where they might have hurt her, he had done this. He had built her a fortress, and left her a key, and a map, and a moat full of proof. She was crying again. She didn't even notice. She saved the letter for last. She sat at the desk in the vault, under the warm light of the brass sconces. She unfolded the pages. There were 4 pages. My darling Adeline, if you are reading this, then I am gone. And I am so sorry. 8 months ago, my doctor gave me a diagnosis I could not survive. There was no cure. There was no fight to be fought. So I fought a different fight. I found out things about Cordelia that I could not undo. Things about Sebastian that made my hands shake. Julian is different. Julian, I believe, is innocent. Please, whatever you do, look at Julian carefully before you judge him. He is not his brother. I could not confront them directly. If I had, they would have found a way. They would have made you disappear along with me. Cordelia is more dangerous than she looks. Sebastian is worse. So I built you a way out. Everything real. Everything that mattered. I moved out of Merrick Holdings 6 months ago, and into a trust called Thornwood. It is held by my oldest friend, Ambrose Whitfield, in Portland. He is a lawyer. He is my best friend, from law school days. Call him when you are ready. He has been waiting. The $15,000 I left you in the will is not an insult. It is a calculation. It is exactly enough to win an uncontested Knox County tax auction on the house at 42 Thornwood Lane, which I purchased through the Hartwick Trust years ago and allowed to lapse into county receivership. I knew you would find your way to this house. I knew you would use your inheritance to buy shelter. I knew you would come to Camden, because you always trusted the ticking, Adeline. Even when you were a little girl, you always trusted the ticking. Rosalind is your mother's oldest friend. She loved your mother very much. She loves you already, even though she has not met you in 20 years. Let her love you, Adeline. Please, the certificates in the portfolio are yours. They are held in your name through the Thornwood Trust. Legal, legitimate, immediately accessible through Ambrose. Use them to live. Use them to fight. Use them to build something new. The USB is your weapon. Give it to Ambrose. He will know what to do. I love you, my brilliant, quiet, watchful girl. I have loved you since the moment you were born. I have loved you through every silence, every stubborn refusal to speak, every long night in the workshop, when you asked me questions I couldn't answer. Do not take revenge, Adeline. Take justice. There is a difference. Your mother taught me that. I am passing it on to you. Live, please, live, all my love, forever. Dad. She didn't move for a long time. She sat at the desk, her father's letter open in front of her. Her hands flat on the wood, her eyes on the ceiling, the ticking of the gears, above, below, all around, every direction. She was inside the clock. She was inside her father's mind. She was inside the very last thing he had ever built. And every piece of it, every gear, every cable, every counterweight, was for her. She stood up. She folded the letter. She put it in her father's brown coat pocket, next to the postcard. She walked out of the vault. Rosalind was waiting. Declan was waiting. Adeline looked at them both. He knew. Yes, Rosalind said. He knew everything. He did. He built this. For me. He did, sweetheart. Adeline took a long breath. The kind of breath you take when something inside you has been dislodged. When something that has been stuck for a long time finally comes free. Then I have work to do, she said. Declan tilted his head. What are you going to do? She looked at him. Her father's daughter. Her mother's eyes. 23 years old. A house of her own. A friend across the street. A man in the room who was starting, without either of them noticing, to look at her like she was the whole sky. I'm not going to take revenge, she said quietly. Then what? She smiled. Very small. Very steady. I'm going to take justice. The gears above them ticked. The sun came through the skylight. And somewhere down in Portland, 90 miles south, a woman named Cordelia Ashcroft Merrick was pouring herself a glass of champagne. Standing in a house that no longer belonged to her. She just didn't know it yet. Ambrose Whitfield's law office was on the second floor of a brick building on Congress Street in Portland. Adeline climbed the stairs slowly. The USB drive was in her right coat pocket. Her father's letter was in her left. She had folded both like sacred things. The door at the top said, Whitfield and Associates, Estate Law. She turned the handle. The receptionist looked up. I'm here to see Mr. Whitfield. Do you have an appointment? No. He's very busy today. Perhaps if I could take a message. Tell him Nathaniel Merrick's daughter is here. The receptionist stopped typing. She looked at Adeline. She picked up her phone. She dialed one number. She whispered into the receiver. 20 seconds later, a door opened at the back of the office, and an old man stepped into the hallway. He was tall, thin, 68 years old, wire-rimmed glasses, a gray suit that had been expensive 20 years ago. His hair was white and neatly combed to one side. He stood in the doorway. He looked at Adeline. His face broke. just for a second. Then he put it back together and walked toward her with his hand extended. Adeline, Mr. Whitfield. Ambrose, please, just Ambrose. She took his hand. His hand was cold. His hand was shaking. He was trying very hard not to cry. I've been waiting 6 months for you to walk through that door, he said. Come in, sit down. Would you like coffee, tea, water, anything at all? She let him fuss. She let him bring her a glass of water she didn't drink. She let him close the office door and pull down the blinds and sit across from her in his big leather chair. Then she took the USB drive out of her pocket. She placed it on his desk. She said, My father told me to give this to you. Ambrose looked at the USB. He looked at her. He said, very quietly, Then we have a lot of work to do. They worked for 3 weeks. Not in the office. Ambrose said the office wasn't safe. They worked at his house. A colonial on the outskirts of Portland with a study that smelled like leather and pipe tobacco. His wife brought them sandwiches. His golden retriever slept under Adeline's chair. Ambrose was methodical. He was patient. He was terrifying. He printed every document on the USB. He organized them into binders. He color-coded them. He built a timeline that stretched 12 feet across his study wall. The scope of what Cordelia and Sebastian had done was worse than Adeline had understood. Sebastian had leveraged Merrick Holdings properties. 6 of them. Downtown Portland real estate. He had put them up as collateral for gambling debts at 3 different offshore syndicates. If those loans came due and Merrick Holdings couldn't pay, the properties would transfer overseas. Legally, quietly, untraceable. Cordelia had been worse. For 2 years, she had been intercepting Nathaniel's mail, forging his signature on transfer authorizations, moving small amounts of money, 50,000 here, 100,000 there, into shell companies incorporated in Delaware, then into shell companies incorporated in the Cayman Islands, then into shell companies incorporated in Panama. By the end, she had funneled almost $4 million out of Merrick Holdings. Nathaniel had documented everything. He had photocopied the forged signatures. He had cross-referenced the shell companies. He had traced the wire transfers. He had built a case a federal prosecutor could take to a grand jury in one afternoon. Ambrose looked at Adeline over the top of his glasses. Your father was very thorough. He was. He was also very quiet. Yes, Adeline. He must have been terrified of what they would do to you. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Ambrose asked her a question, one night, that she was not expecting. What about Julian? She looked up. What about him? He's not on any of the documents. His name doesn't appear on the shell companies. He didn't sign any of the forged transfers. As far as I can tell, he had no direct involvement. He was there. Adeline. Being there is not a crime. She was quiet. He's her son. Yes. He benefited from everything. Yes. He didn't ask questions. Also yes. Ambrose leaned back in his chair. But your father specifically wrote about him in the letter. Do you remember what he said? She did. She remembered every word. Julian is different. Julian, I believe, is innocent. Please, whatever you do, look at Julian carefully before you judge him. She stared at the timeline on the wall. I want to talk to him. That's not wise. I want to. Adeline, if you tip him off, he'll warn the others. He'll destroy evidence. He'll help them run. She stood up. She walked to the window. November in Portland. The maple tree in Ambrose's yard had gone bare. The last leaves were on the ground. He won't warn them, she said. How do you know? Because he wasn't smiling at the funeral. Ambrose was quiet. He said, very carefully. That's not evidence, sweetheart. I know, but it's what I have. She turned to look at him. My father said to look at Julian carefully. I'm going to look at Julian carefully. She met him at a small coffee shop in Camden. She had chosen it deliberately, 90 miles away from Portland, away from Cordelia, away from Sebastian, away from everything they controlled. Julian arrived 15 minutes late. He looked terrible. Thin, unshaven. His clothes were expensive but wrinkled, like he had slept in them. His eyes were red. He sat down across from her. He didn't order anything. He put his hands flat on the table like he was trying to keep them from shaking. He said, "You look just like him." She didn't answer. "I mean it. When you walked in. For a second, I thought." He stopped. He shook his head. "I miss him too, Adeline. I know you don't believe that. But I do." She reached into her bag. She pulled out a folder. She placed it in front of him. "Open it." "What is this?" "Open it, Julian." He opened it. He looked at the first page. He went white. He turned to the second page. The third. The fourth. He kept turning pages. Faster and faster. His breathing changed. His hands started shaking. He got to the page with the forged signatures. He made a sound. Not a word. Not a sentence. Just a sound. Like someone had punched him. "This isn't." "It is. My mother didn't. She did. Sebastian wouldn't. He did, Julian. He did all of it. And she helped him." Julian put his hands over his face. He didn't cry loudly. He cried the way grown men cry, when they've been holding it in too long, and it finally cracks the levee. Silent. Shoulders shaking. Nothing coming out but breath. Adeline sat across from him. She didn't speak. She waited. For 4 minutes. For 5. When he finally lifted his face. His eyes were wrecked. He said, "I didn't know. I know. I swear to you. I swear on my life. I didn't know. I believe you. I loved him, Adeline. Your father. He was the first." He stopped. He couldn't finish. She waited. Finally he said, very softly, "He was the first man who ever asked me what I wanted to do with my life." And listen to the answer. Adeline's throat closed. She didn't say anything, because she understood exactly what he meant. She had lived that man for 23 years. Julian had lived him for 3, but 3 had been enough. 3 had changed him. She let Julian breathe for a while. Then she said, "You have a choice." He looked up. "You can cooperate with the prosecution. You can testify against your mother. You can testify against your brother. It will not be easy. It will hurt. You will be treated like a witness, not a family member. You will lose everything you have ever known. And you may not be forgiven. Not by them. Not for a long time." She paused. "Or you can walk out that door and pretend you never saw this folder. You can go back to Portland. You can smile at Cordelia. You can drink champagne with Sebastian. And you can wait to see what happens." Julian looked at her. His voice was hoarse. "What will happen? Federal prosecution. Racketeering. Wire fraud. Forgery. Conspiracy. It's coming, Julian. And when it comes, everyone at that table goes down together. Everyone. Unless one of them has already come forward." Julian was quiet for a long time. He looked at his hands. He looked at the folder. He looked out the window at the harbor. Finally he said, "Where do I sign?" Adeline didn't smile. There was nothing to smile about, but something inside her chest. Something that had been clenched for weeks. Loosened. Just a little. She said, "Ambrose Whitfield, Portland. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. I'll be there. Julian." He looked at her. "He was proud of you." Julian's face broke. She stood up. She left him at the table with the folder. She walked out into the November afternoon. The last thing she heard, as the door swung shut behind her, was the small, shaking sound of a young man crying alone in a coffee shop. She didn't look back, because if she had, she might have gone back inside. She might have sat down. She might have held his hand. And that wasn't what he needed. He needed to sit alone with what he had just learned. Everyone deserved that. Even the people who had helped hurt you. The investigation took 4 months. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind you see on television. There was no midnight raid. No SWAT team on the front lawn. No FBI agents kicking in doors during a champagne brunch. That's not how federal white-collar cases work. Federal white-collar cases work slowly, quietly, through subpoenas and grand juries and forensic accountants, through sealed indictments and coordinated arrests. Cordelia was arrested on a Tuesday morning in March. She was picking up dry cleaning. 2 federal agents in dark coats walked up to her on the sidewalk. They said her name. They asked her to come with them. They did not raise their voices. She raised hers. She screamed at them in front of the dry cleaner. She screamed about lawyers. She screamed about mistakes. She screamed about a woman named Adeline Merrick, who was ruining her life. The agents were very polite. They put her in the back of a sedan. They drove her to the federal building in Portland. She was arraigned that afternoon. Sebastian tried to run. Of course he did. He booked a flight to Zurich the day after his mother was arrested. He was stopped at Logan Airport in Boston with a suitcase full of cash and 2 passports. One in his name. One in a name he had been building for 3 years. He was arraigned in Boston. He was arraigned in Portland. He was arraigned in 3 other states where his shell companies had done business. The bail hearings alone took 2 weeks. He didn't get bail. Julian did what he said he would do. He walked into Ambrose Whitfield's office at 9 o'clock the next morning. He signed a cooperation agreement. He turned over every document he had ever seen. He testified to the grand jury. He did not ask for immunity. He did not ask for special treatment. He said, when Ambrose offered him a plea deal, "Whatever the court decides, I'll accept it. I helped them. Even if I didn't know it, I helped them." Ambrose looked at Adeline across the desk after Julian left. He said, "That is not a young man who was in on it." She said, "I know. She did not attend the trial. She could have. She was entitled to. As the primary victim of the estate fraud, she had a seat reserved in the front row. Her name on a placard. A federal marshal assigned to escort her in and out. She didn't go. Instead, she stayed in Camden. She stayed at 42 Thornwood Lane. She helped Declan repair the porch. She helped Rosalind rake leaves in the yard across the street. She sat with Poppy after school and taught her to identify birds by their calls. When the verdict came down on a Thursday afternoon in April, Ambrose called her from the courthouse. She was sitting in the workshop on the 3rd floor, winding one of the smaller clocks. The gears were still turning above her. The great pendulum was still swinging. She picked up on the 2nd ring. She said, "Tell me." Ambrose said, "Cordelia, guilty on all counts. Sebastian, guilty on all counts. Julian, suspended sentence, 2 years probation, full cooperation credit. He is a free man, Adeline." She closed her eyes. She said, "Thank you, Ambrose. Sweetheart, are you all right?" "I am. Are you sure?" "Ambrose." Her voice was steady. "My father built this ending for me. All I had to do was walk through the door he left open." She did go to the sentencing. Not for Sebastian. For Cordelia. She sat in the back of the courtroom, in her father's brown coat. She listened to the prosecutor read the statement of facts. She listened to the defense attorney beg for leniency. She listened to the judge deliver a sentence of 11 years. Cordelia turned around in the defendant's chair. She looked for Adeline. She found her, for maybe 5 full seconds, across a crowded federal courtroom. The 2 of them looked at each other. Cordelia's face was thin. Her hair was flat. She was not wearing makeup. She looked, for the first time, since Adeline had known her, like an old woman. Adeline didn't hate her. She thought she would. When this day came, she thought she would feel triumph. Or rage. Or something big. She just felt tired. And a little sorry. For the woman who had chosen this. When the sentencing was over. When the reporters had left. When the courtroom was empty except for the marshals waiting to take Cordelia to holding. Adeline walked up to the rail. Cordelia looked at her. Cordelia's eyes were wet. She said, "Adeline." Adeline said, "My father loved you." Cordelia's face crumpled. "That is the part that hurts me the most," Adeline said. "He loved you, really loved you. Not the version of you that was performing. The real you, the one underneath. He loved that woman." Cordelia was crying. "And you knew he loved you, and you did this anyway." "Adeline, I don't hate you, Cordelia. I want you to know that. Hate is too much work. She stopped. She took a breath. "I hope you can live with what you traded him for." She walked away. Cordelia called her name. Twice. She didn't turn around. Julian came to Camden 6 weeks later. He drove up on a Saturday morning in a used car he had bought, with money from a job he had taken at a hardware store in Bangor. He was thinner than before, but not the wrong kind of thin. The kind of thin that comes from hard work and honest sleep. He knocked on Adeline's front door. She opened it. He stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets. He said, "I don't know why I'm here." She said, "Come in." She made him coffee. She sat across from him at the kitchen table. She watched him hold the mug, with both hands like a person who had not been given many warm things lately. He said, "I got a job. I heard. Hardware store. In Bangor. That's a good store. I like it. People come in. They need things. I help them." "Julian." He looked up. She said, "I have a warehouse." He waited. "For the trust. For all the paperwork. For all the assets that need to be sorted. It's a mess. A century of Silas Hartwick's files. 8 months of my father's records. I need someone to organize it." Julian's eyes filled. He said, "Adeline, it doesn't pay well. I don't care. It's just an archive job. I don't care. You'd have to move to Camden. I don't care." She looked at him. She said, "You would be working for me. I know. You would be reporting to me. I know. I might sometimes be your boss in ways you don't like." He almost laughed. "Adeline, you already were." She looked at him a long moment. She said, "'Kay then." She stood up. She held out her hand. "When can you start?" He took her hand. He said, "Tomorrow." They shook. It was not forgiveness. Not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could, in time, become forgiveness. That was enough. Spring turned into summer. The house at 42 Thornwood Lane came back to life. Slowly, one room at a time, Declan and his crew rebuilt the porch. They restored the widow's walk. They replaced every one of the missing slate shingles on the roof. They stripped and repainted the siding in soft yellow. The color the house had been, Rosalind said, on the day Silas Hartwick had brought her home as a bride. The workshop on the 3rd floor stayed exactly as it was. Adeline would not let anyone touch it. The gears kept turning. The pendulum kept swinging. The counterweight kept scraping and dropping. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud. All day, all night. A machine that had been built to hold a secret was now simply keeping time. She liked the sound. It was her father's sound. It was the sound of him thinking. She did not sell the house in Portland. The big one. The Beacon Hill Colonial where she had grown up. Where Cordelia had lived. Where Sebastian had lounged in her father's chair. She had it emptied. She had it cleaned. She had it repainted. She had every trace of Cordelia removed and put in storage. Then she turned it into something else. She called it Ellen House, after her mother, a transitional home for single mothers who needed 6 months of stable housing while they got their lives together. It had a full kitchen. It had bedrooms for children. It had a garden. It had a playroom. It had a woman named Marta at the front desk, who had been through the program herself and knew what everyone was carrying when they walked through the door. Adeline funded it out of the Thornwood Trust. She did not put her name on the building. She did not want it. At the opening ceremony, on a warm Saturday in July, Rosalind cut the ribbon with a pair of ceremonial scissors. She stood on the front steps in her green cardigan. She looked out at the small crowd, and she said, in a voice that only shook a little, 26 years ago, my best friend Ellen Merrick died, and she left behind a daughter who has grown up to be more like her mother than she knows. Ellen, if you can hear me, this house is because of you. It is for every mother who is too tired to keep going, and every child who is scared their world is ending. It is for the ones who need someone to say, you are not alone. You are safe here. Come inside. The kettle is on. Adeline could not stop crying. Declan handed her a handkerchief. Poppy held her hand. She and Declan did not rush anything. She had told him, the night after the vault opened, that she needed time, that she had a lot of things inside her that had to settle, that she wasn't ready. He had said, I've got time. I'll be around. And he was around when she was cleaning out the study. He was around when she was crying in the workshop. He was around when she couldn't sleep at 3 in the morning, and she went walking through the house and he happened to be there fixing a hinge. He was around when Poppy needed a story read, and Adeline was closer. He didn't push. He didn't hover. He didn't ask. He just was, until one evening, in late August, when she was sitting on the front porch watching the sun set over the harbor, and he sat down next to her. And they didn't talk for a long time, and then, very quietly, she reached over and took his hand. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything. Some things don't need to be said out loud. 1 year after her father's death, to the day, Adeline climbed the stairs to the workshop. She was carrying a small silver picture frame. Inside the frame was a photograph. Her father, standing in his workshop in Portland, 20 years ago, holding a little girl on his hip. The little girl was maybe 3 years old. She had her arms wrapped around his neck. She was laughing. The photograph had been in the vault, in one of the drawers of the oak desk. She had not found it until 3 weeks ago. She placed the picture on the workbench. She looked at it for a long time. She said, out loud, to no one, I understand now, Dad. She sat down on the stool. She looked up through the skylight. The September sun poured down. The gears turned. The pendulum swung. The house kept time. She said, you didn't give me nothing. You gave me everything. You gave me a way to find myself. You gave me Rosalind. You gave me Declan. You gave me Poppy. You gave me Julian. You even gave me Ambrose. You gave me a whole town, Dad. You gave me a whole life. Her voice was steady. I was so angry at you. For a while, I thought you had left me with $15,000 and nothing else. But you left me with everything. You just made me walk to it. She smiled. She was crying, but she was smiling. Thank you. She stood up. She walked to the pendulum. She placed her palm flat against the brass housing. She felt the vibration of the mechanism running underneath her hand. She whispered, I trust the ticking. That evening, she and Declan and Poppy and Rosalind walked down to the harbor. It was a Wednesday. The tourists were mostly gone. The town was quiet. The lobster boats were coming in for the day. Poppy ran ahead to the water's edge. She was 6 years old. She was wearing her rubber boots. She was picking up sea glass and putting the pieces in her pockets. Rosalind walked with her cane, slowly, but not sadly. Declan carried the basket. Adeline had made sandwiches. There were fresh peaches. There was a thermos of coffee. There was a small jar of blackberry jam. They sat on the rocks. They watched the sun go down over the water. Poppy climbed into Adeline's lap. Poppy said, Adeline. Yes, honey. What does the clock in the attic count? Adeline was quiet for a moment. She looked at Rosalind. She looked at Declan. She looked down at the top of Poppy's small warm head. She said, Counts the good things, sweetheart. Every tick is another good thing. Another moment we get to be loved. Poppy thought about that. Then she said, very seriously, that's a lot of ticking. Adeline laughed. She laughed so hard that Rosalind laughed. and Declan laughed, and Poppy laughed because everyone else was laughing. The four of them on the rocks, laughing while the sun went down, on a warm evening, in a small town, in a life that had almost been taken away. Almost, but not. There are some kinds of loss that never fully heal. But there are also some kinds of love that keep loving you long after the person who loved you is gone. If you are watching this, and you have lost someone, please listen. They are still speaking to you, in the postcards you find in old coats, in the friends they left waiting, in the doors they held open for you. If you listen carefully, you will hear them, every tick. Another good thing, every good thing, another reason to keep going. The end.